Hey everyone! Before we open today's file, please make sure to follow us on Instagram at d.s.radio, where you can find all the images that go along with today's case. You can drop us an email at contact.dsradio@gmail.com. You can find all of our socials in the Linktree bio on our Instagram profile, including links to merch. If you're feeling especially generous, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/dystopian simulation radio, where you can get access to our exclusive Instagram page and make suggestions for upcoming episode topics that you would like us to cover. Speaking of Patreon, thanks to our Patreons, Riff Cult, Cropley Crab, Cash Broadus, Raspberry Jr., Jason R. Nelson, Creepy Paper, Jamie Sook, Michael Laughlin, Lindsay Keller, Mike Wright, Greer Weaver, Kelsey Carruthers, Linz Gibbon, Drake Holvig, Only Child, Michael M, Wesley Akers, Riaz K, Emily Medeiros, Pip, Heather Wynn, Graves, Devon Sweatshirt, The Ordained Sinister Minister, and Philip Hoffman. Hi everyone, and welcome to Dystopian Simulation Radio. I'm your host, Linz.
And I'm here. I'm Chris. Just wanted to leave you in the lurch there for a second.
Yeah, what was that about?
I'm here this week. I'm back. I have been released from the hospital, and I am back in the real world, or at least that's what I think.
You might want to explain being released from the hospital, Chris, for those who may have missed the last episode.
Nope. No. So anybody who doesn't know, when I was in the middle of editing the episode on Killdozer, which had a really fantastic response. Everybody, thank you for all your comments, getting in touch with us. My wife suddenly went into labour, and I had to kind of drop everything and go into hospital with her. So because of the current COVID rules, technically there's none in England right now, but in hospitals there are still some, as you'd imagine, you'd probably hope. So when you go into hospital as a partner, once you're in, you're in. You can't leave.
Oh,
it's a bit
that
like...
That explains a lot. I was wondering why you were actually there, sounding like you couldn't leave.
Yeah, if I left the room, I couldn't get back in again.
Damn.
You know, they've got like electronic doors and stuff, so like it was like, yeah, I was there for the long run. So we were there for 11 days in the end, which was quite a test, but we got through it in the end, and I'm really happy to report that we've got a beautiful, happy baby boy. We couldn't be any more overjoyed.
Yay!
And we also couldn't be any more tired as well.
Yeah, I was going to say you sound very quiet and tired. Oh yeah, we should also explain that we had these episodes pre-recorded in person. And they disappeared. So we're recording them again over the internet, because I'm in the south of Sweden, Chris is in the UK, and this is the only way we can do it, so...
Like it or lump it. So what are we going to be looking at today?
Chris.
Yes.
You've always been a fan of Japan, long before you lived there. Can you remember the feelings of excitement and perhaps the expectations you may have had of Japan before setting foot on the soil?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's literally the opposite side of the world, so it couldn't have been any more built up by the time I finally got on that plane. And that plane ride, which took about 11 hours, felt like it took 11 years. I was so excited to get there.
I actually think I remember the first time you went there and you were packing.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. That would have been 2011.
Yeah, crazy. So would you say that Japan met your expectations? Was it as good as you imagined?
Oh, it exceeded them. I mean, I stayed there for 5 years, so it once it got me, it got me.
If Japan hadn't have met your expectations, what do you think you would have done? Like, if being in Japan had left you feeling, let's say, terribly upset and frustrated to the point that you began suffering symptoms of psychosis, who would you contact?
I must admit that wasn't in my itinerary. Maybe the British Embassy?
Around 1 million Japanese citizens travel to Paris each year to ascend the Eiffel Tower, gaze upon magnificent works of art, sample exquisite French cuisine, visit famous historical sites, and presumably take hundreds of pictures of themselves in berets doing so to flex on the peasants back home. But since Japan has a quite idealized view of Paris and has done since the 19th century, many Japanese tourists who finally get to visit there end up having nervous breakdowns to the point of experiencing genuine symptoms of psychosis at how Paris in reality is or can be a bit rubbish.
Ooh. Yeah.
Sort of like showing up to London after watching Notting Hill or Harry Potter and then ending up in some dodgy underpass, getting punched in the gut and having your phone swiped.
Yeah, welcome to England. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me in a way. I mean, maybe the full-on psychosis does, but
yeah.
I mean, when I was in Japan, a lot of people, when I would be my students and so on, you'd be like, okay, what country do you want to visit? And they'd be like, Paris. And you'd be like, that's not a country. And they'd be like, I want to go to Paris. Okay, then fine. And then
so a lot of your students said that it was in the top three.
It's like when a lot of them wouldn't have thought about it too much when they do it. They'd go for Paris. And my personal feeling is because there's a lot of like French bakeries.
Oh,
like
in Japan?
One of the biggest sort of chains is it's called like the French Bakery or something, and there's lots of very Japanese baked goods in there, but it's got a French flag on the window, so hey ho. And also having been to Paris myself, I mean, I know when the last time I went to Paris itself I was about 8, and I realised it was a shithole.
Oh, sorry to anyone living in Paris.
No, it's not. My aunt used to live there.
Yeah, it's not a shithole.
So I used to go over and visit quite regularly. She lives in the centre of Paris, not too far from the Eiffel Tower, actually, when she was working for a company over there. And my intense memory being sort of the streets around the Eiffel Tower and so on in the immediate vicinity were lovely. But then you walked like one street behind it and it was just like strip clubs and everything was just a little bit seedy.
Sounds wonderful.
Let's go.
Oh yeah, another place for the road trip. Me and Chris have been creating a DSR road trip, and it started with the abduction site of a Scottish man. Alien abduction site of a Scottish man. And now we're sending in Paris apparently. Strip clubs in Paris.
Hey.
Coming soon.
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm trying to get at here, Chris, is oftentimes places are portrayed with a much more romantic spin in the movies as opposed to how they really are IRL. And this can be disappointing and stressful if you've daydreamed and idealized a place in your mind, only to show up there and have an isolating and very unpleasant experience. So Japan is known to have amazing hospitality service and is generally exceptionally clean with accommodating people. Paris, on the other hand, can get pretty dirty. It has quite a high level of crime, and those working in hospitality can have quite a short fuse with tourists who don't speak the language. This is not what Japanese tourists expect and what has been portrayed to them in movies and entertainment, like you said, and it can be quite a shock to the system. One of the most common crimes in Paris, and one often suffered by tourists generally, is robbery and pickpocketing, especially on crammed metros. I think being mugged in the street in a foreign country is enough to stress anyone out, though. So Chris, have you had any negative or jarring experiences in another country?
I mean, not in Japan. I mean, Japan, as you mentioned, was incredibly safe. I mean, one time I even accidentally left my SLR camera on the subway in Tokyo. It went all the way to the end of the line. Nobody touched it, and it was returned to me.
It's amazing.
I know.
Did the person who found it, take a selfie?
No, I wish they did. I would have liked to have given them a big hug, to be honest, but nobody touched it, and it was found by a member of staff. So there you
awesome.
Go.
So pretty good experience in Japan.
Yeah.
No one was taking any pictures up your skirt or anything?
No.
Well, Chris, I've had many bad experiences in foreign countries.
Oh, really?
One that sticks out is an attempted robbery that didn't end too well for the robber, but that's a story for another side. So let's not poop on Paris too much. There's a beautiful side to it, and it'll certainly take your breath away, but only if you're realistic in your expectations, because, it's a real city. So, Chris, what do you think the most common symptoms of Paris syndrome are? Take a shot.
I'm going to guess that they display symptoms of kind of melancholia, of being very sad, maybe even a bit disorientated, maybe sort of having what you might call a breakdown, just sort of shutting down and so on. And I imagine it's quite an internal thing. What are the symptoms?
Symptoms of Paris syndrome: dizziness, sweating, acute delusions, hallucinations, and feelings of persecution.
Oh.
Yeah. Imagine dropping to a foreign country, going around for a few hours and feeling that, being hit with that.
I mean, that's extreme. I mean, that is really an extreme reaction to be having. I mean, when you go to the point of having hallucinations and delusions,
I know,
just from your expectations of a city, I mean, what were you expecting?
Yeah, there may be a reason for that, but we'll get into it. But I thought like dizziness and sweating, okay, common symptoms of anxiety, you're somewhere new.
I mean,
and
plenty
then you
of
get
people probably get that going up the Eiffel Tower without
exactly.
this,
Yeah, so then we get to acute delusions, hallucinations, and feelings of persecution. You can see where this is going to take a turn. So, according to a paper titled "The Japanese on a Pathological Trip to Paris: An Original Model of Transcultural Care," since 1988, 63 Japanese patients have been hospitalized at St. Anne Hospital Center in France with Paris syndrome. The majority of those hospitalized were done so via a third party after displaying delusional or violent behavior, megalomania, suicidal actions, manic and paranoid behavior, and so on. So there's a Japanese psychiatrist who works at the St. Anne Hospital Center in Paris. She's called Hiraki Ota, and she actually came up with the term Paris syndrome and even authored a book on it. So just for some statistics here, of the 63 patients hospitalized over the years, 34 were female, 29 were male, and age-wise they ranged from young to old, between the ages of 20 to 65. Oh. Half of the sufferers were between the ages of 20 to 30, and almost half suffered from schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders.
Ah, okay.
Exactly.
So that's kind of, I was thinking there, I was like, oh, that's very general. This is like, this could strike at any time. But then when you
you're Japanese and in a very small bracket of people.
Exactly. When you add that last point in there, okay, right.
But this is kind of strange to me because I remember I think it was like the mid-2000s or something, hearing about this report from the BBC about like a hotline that Japanese people who suffered a breakdown could call when they went to Paris and realized it wasn't what they thought. And at the time reading that, I was like, this can't be that common. Came to find out it's not.
Just one very bored Japanese person just sat there.
Yeah, in like the embassy or something, just like going, they never call.
Yeah, kyo de no shinai ne.
Once hospitalized, the patients would usually be given counseling as well as medications such as antipsychotics and mood stabilizers, and they would be communicated with in their own language and would spend around 2 weeks on average in the facility. So of the 63 patients recorded at the hospital over the years, 28 left accompanied by a family member who came to Paris to escort them back to Japan, and 18 returned in the way of medical reparations. So Japan flew them back over as a medical emergency, and the rest were able to get themselves back home after they completed treatment. Many who recover from Paris syndrome are said to be left traumatized with the fear of traveling outside the country again, which is totally understandable after an experience like that.
I mean, generalizing, just from my own experience in the country, Japanese people tend to holiday in Japan. It's got a very strong domestic travel industry. One of the key reasons for that, apart from the hospitality you mentioned before, is the language barrier. There's not a whole lot of places that have that Japanese language on demand, and Japan's English level is one of the lowest in Asia, unfortunately. So because of that,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's got the kind of the biggest economy. It's up there, but in terms of English languages, it's one of the lowest because people, in my opinion, Japanese people don't particularly need to know English because it's entirely possible to live in Japan without ever needing English. Whereas in other countries, it may be very beneficial to know English because it will open up a whole world of opportunities for you in the future. Japanese people don't tend to travel abroad for that reason. Of course, I know many, many Japanese people who do travel abroad, but just talking about my own family, for example, my mother and father-in-law left the country for the very first time in their mid-60s to visit me and my wife.
Oh, how did they like it then?
I mean, they loved it. And I think if they'd been left alone, it would have been a little bit daunting. But by like the second day, my father-in-law was already going to Co-op to buy tins of Sapporo beer.
So he didn't even try any British beer?
Oh no, he sampled pretty much everything.
Isn't he like a priest?
He is.
Is that allowed?
Oh yeah.
If you want a nice story about Chris's father-in-law in Japan,
Yeah.
there's a very nice lion pee story. His father-in-law ordered some lion urine from Amazon for quite a funny reason. So go back into the archives and find that.
Listen back to the archives. There's a very good reason for it.
Yeah.
And now I can guarantee you've already got the app open on your phone, Googling lion piss on Amazon.
Yeah. So Chris,
Yes.
back to Paris syndrome. There's also Florence syndrome, or Stendhal syndrome as it's more commonly known. This syndrome is named after the French author Stendhal and is usually suffered after seeing beautiful works of art or objects in person. So people would often suffer the symptoms of this syndrome while looking at the statue of David in Florence, for example. Speaking of the statue of David, as a side note, Chris, have you ever seen the micro penis segment on Good Morning TV where they start talking about the statue of David and his wang?
What?
Let's take a listen to that now.
Nearly half of all British men, over half actually, about 60% say that they are concerned about the size of their manhood.
Meaning concerned as in small?
Worrying that it's too small.
Do you know the other thing I say? As my wife and I were in Rome last summer...
We did, we had a conversation, didn't we, about
My wife
that?
noticed all the classical... She had great interest in the classical statues that were there. And you noticed what?
They're all very small. And I thought, yeah, have you...
Yep, I've noticed that as well, yeah.
Yeah, you've noticed that as well. Yeah. And the thing is, I suppose, that men don't talk about it. It was even when I said to Eamon, gosh, you know, all the statues, aren't the penises small? And he went, all
Okay, wow. There's nothing quite like British daytime television, is there? And Aben Holmes tried to justify really hard that when he and his wife went to see the statue of David, he definitely didn't look at the penis. No.
I can't believe that was a segment on TV. I was actually kind of shocked. And kind of brave for those guys to go on TV and kind of campaign for their...
Oh,
I don't know what they
definitely.
were campaigning for. Maybe just acceptance and sensitivity to the issue, but
Yeah.
thank God those comments are disabled. Were the comments disabled?
I don't know. I didn't dare look at them. I was too busy looking at, I think it was Ant in the middle, who was just sort of rocking back and forth slowly throughout the entire interview.
So, Chris, the symptoms of Stendhal condition are described as rapid heartbeat, fainting, and occasionally hallucinations. Stendhal described suffering these symptoms after a visit to Florence, where he wrote,
I was in a sort of ecstasy from the idea of being in Florence, close to the great men whose tombs I had seen. Absorbed in the contemplation of sublime beauty, I reached a point where one encounters celestial sensations. Everything spoke so vividly to my soul. Ah, if I could only forget. I had palpitations of the heart, what in Berlin they call nerves. Life was drained from me. I walked with the fear of falling.
you know, first I was trying not to laugh at your accent, which was kind of hot, to be honest with you. Secondly, I like the point where he said, what they call in Berlin, nerves. I don't know why that got me so hard. So, Chris, you've heard of Paris syndrome. Stop. You've heard of Stendhal syndrome.
Yes.
Let's welcome to the stage Jerusalem syndrome.
Oh.
Any idea what the symptoms of Jerusalem syndrome could be, Chris?
Well, considering, unlike the other two cities, it's got a very strong connection with religion, I'm going to guess sort of religion-based delusion?
Ding, ding, ding. So, those suffering from Jerusalem syndrome experience religiously themed and obsessive ideas, often coupled with delusions or psychotic experiences when visiting Jerusalem. The condition was first identified in 1982. There's a lot of shit going on in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of shit going on in the... Like, that hairspray really got to everybody, I swear.
A lot of fucking cocaine.
The cocaine coupled with the hairspray did a thing.
Let's write a paper.
Time to go traveling. So this syndrome affects a lot more people per year than Paris syndrome, with around 50 to 100 tourists afflicted annually.
That's
around 40 tourists per year are hospitalized. Yeah, quite a lot. Significantly more than Paris syndrome.
Yeah, sorry, I was just running the numbers in my head there. And that's like, what,
A
1 to 2 a week?
Yeah, it's a bunch. So there's usually, unsurprisingly, there's usually a peak in cases around religious holidays. So Easter, Passover, and of course, Christmas.
And it's Easter coming up in a couple of weeks.
Chris, any idea of the type of people that this would affect?
I'm going to guess people who have already got quite a strong religious founding anyway, and when they get there they sort of interpret some kind of divine calling to them. I'm not going to imagine somebody who's just going there for the wonderful bagels is really
I
getting
want a bagel so bad right now.
is really getting affected by this. But I'm going to guess in a way kind of with people who've already had previous mental health issues suffering from Paris syndrome. Potentially here it's a pre-existing notion of religion that is calling to these people. I would probably guess though that that's going to be there's got to be something else to it though, because it's not like only 50 to 100 people visit Jerusalem for religious reasons a year.
Yeah, nail on the head, basically. So evangelical Christians make up the majority of tourists suffering Jerusalem syndrome. However, people of other religious backgrounds, including Muslims, Christians, and Jewish people, have been affected also. The syndrome often inspires the idea that the sufferer is a biblical figure or martyr, and they tend to believe that they're like Jesus Christ, for example, and they wander around preaching and giving sermons in the streets. So if you look up Jerusalem syndrome, you'll see photographs of people dressed in long white robes with beards and long hair, wandering around just being a menace to people, other tourists. So if you imagine you're there just visiting, you walk by and some white guy in a robe rushes you and starts preaching about, the second coming. And
they're not like those dudes who used to be like, always in town on a Saturday afternoon, with a big sign just shouting like repent.
Well, I think it would be like that on steroids, because imagine those guys but dressed in like a bed sheet from their hotel bed, wrapped around them and like with long hair and beards, going like this is more than just I'm afraid of the end times, repent. This is like, I am a biblical figure and I know what's happening and I'm trying to tell you, you better listen. So it's more like it's a delusion, basically. While looking up video examples of people displaying symptoms of the syndrome, I happened upon this lesser known gem, and it's a clip featuring Louis Theroux doing a segment on Jerusalem syndrome.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're excited at this, but for those listening who don't know who Louis Theroux is, he's a British documentary filmmaker and a journalist, and he's quite famous for a series he has called Weird Weekends. So look him up, you really won't regret it. He's honestly one of my favourite people, and I'm sure a lot of British people are nodding in agreement right now when I say he's basically a national treasure. So Theroux managed to capture a prime example of Jerusalem syndrome in a clip, which I'm going to play for you now, Chris.
Sweet.
Jerusalem, the holiest place in the Holy Land. Tourists from all over the world flock to this city to be filled with the Spirit of God. They come by the busload to breathe the air of Abraham and King David, to see where Jesus was born, where he walked and lived, to go back to the time of the prophets and lose themselves in holy ecstasy until suddenly they feel different.
G'day, mate. Welcome.
This is John Lichtenberg. He used to be an air conditioning installer in Brisbane, Australia. He came to Jerusalem 3 years ago and stuck around to wait for the second coming of Christ.
What would happen if Jesus did come back today? Hallelujah.
John has the Jerusalem syndrome, a well-documented medical condition where sufferers identify a little too strongly with figures from the Bible. In John's case, King David.
Chris, if you could explain to the people what you're seeing, and we'll also link this video on our Instagram at d.s.radio, and you can see all the visuals for all of our episodes there, past and present, as well as some lovely pictures of our faces. So Chris, if you could explain to the people what you saw.
Sure. So, having just watched that video, there was 2 examples of Jerusalem syndrome. One was a guy named John, who was cosplaying as King David, and jumping around playing some sort of harp in the street, who seemed to be quite out there. I'll put it that way.
That's being kind.
Yes. There was another guy called Jerry who was on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, who had been a firefighter in the US, who came across very much down to earth and level, but had done exactly the same thing that John had done and had given up his life and moved his entire family to Jerusalem in order to be on this hillside where supposedly the apocalypse is going to start. So obviously it presents itself in two very different ends of the spectrum here, one which is quite outwardly what you might consider outwardly delusioned, and the other not to be at all, yet they've both taken more or less the same action. The only difference is that John is pretending he's King David and cosplaying as a Roman.
He's very jovial, I'll give him that.
I mean, he's got a good set of lungs on him.
He's enjoying it,
He is.
I think.
You do,
But you know, yeah, I wonder if he's still out there. I mean, it's been years.
Let's track him down. No,
Yep,
actually, let's
upcoming
not.
episode.
He'd probably be a terrible interview.
I did read that, you know how with the Paris syndrome, a Japanese mental health worker kind of looked into it and coined a term and helped people. Well, there was some doctors in Jerusalem who took a very different approach, a less sensitive approach, may I say. So he would get two people suffering Jerusalem syndrome who both believed they were the same character, let's say two King Davids.
Okay.
And he'd put them in a room together.
Is this like Battle Royale rules? Like, only one can survive?
Yeah. No, but he'd put them in a room together and just watch. I imagine with a level of interest, and also it was probably a bit funny. Watch them argue and curse each other out. The psychiatrists and psychologists that Louis speaks with basically say that the city of Jerusalem, although divine, attracts, quote, crazy people, or people who wind up crazy after visiting, which is a bit insensitive, to be honest, coming from a medical professional, but okay. So many of the tourists suffering Jerusalem syndrome trade in their language in favour of speaking in tongues and begin fasting for 40 days. Apparently, the fasting for 40 days thing is something that hotel managers commonly experience, and their guests will start like refusing food and say that they're fasting. And it's so common that they'll usually try and wait it out for a bit, but if it doesn't get any better and the tourist becomes a danger to themselves or others, then they'll contact a medical centre and get them help.
Wow. So it happens with such frequency that they've got protocols in place?
Exactly. It happens all the time. And sometimes I think people just get a bit wrapped up, you know, like they get there and it's an iconic place historically. And especially if you're religious, you probably get really excited when you get there. Okay, that's fine, you know, getting wrapped up in something. But when the delusion kicks in, that's when the hotel managers are like, oh, here we go again. They probably do have a hotline to call. So yeah, Chris, there's a paper published by Cambridge University, and it contains several examples of real cases of Jerusalem syndrome. And one of these examples, if you could read it to the listeners.
An American tourist aged in his 40s suffering from paranoid schizophrenia had been admitted to hospital and treated over the years in the USA. He began working on his body image by exercising and weightlifting in the framework of a rehabilitation program. Over time, he started to identify with the biblical character Samson. Eventually, he was overcome by a compulsion to come to Israel in order to move one of the giant stone blocks forming the Western Wailing Wall, which, in his opinion, was not in the right place. On arriving at the Western Wall, he attempted to move one of the stones. His actions instigated a terrible commotion, culminating in police intervention and his placement in the hospital of the Kfar Shah Mental Health Center. Contrary to accepted practice, the duty psychiatrist challenged the patient's delusional ideas, telling him that he could not possibly be Samson, and that, according to the Bible, Samson had never been in Jerusalem. The patient reacted to this with rage, became aggressive, broke a window, and escaped through it. A team was sent out to look for him, and a student nurse found him standing at a bus stop. Demonstrating commendable wisdom, she told him that he had proved he had possessed qualities similar to Samson's, and that he could now return to the hospital, which he did of his own volition. A hospital examination showed him to be in an acute psychotic state. He was convinced that he was Samson and that he had a mission to accomplish. After receiving antipsychotic medication, he calmed down and was able to fly back home, escorted by his father.
Wow. What a tale.
That is quite something. I mean, the image of him flying into a rage, breaking a window, and escaping out a la the Incredible Hulk is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy that he got the help at the end, but I'm sorry, I couldn't help but picture some early Arnold Schwarzenegger role when you were reading that story out. It reminds me of Hercules in New York. I don't know if you've seen clips from that.
When he fights the bear in Times Square or something.
Just going around going like, yes, I'm Hercules, son of Zeus. So, although most cases of Jerusalem syndrome are quite harmless or easily contained, there's actually one quite famous case of an Australian man named Dennis Michael Rowan that ended in the burning of the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Oh.
The Al-Aqsa Mosque is located in the Old City and it's the third most holy site in Islam. It's built on Temple Mount and Muslims believe that Muhammad was transported from the Great Mosque of Mecca to this Al-Aqsa Mosque at some point, so it's a really important site. But on August 21st, 1969, Roham dumped kerosene in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and set it alight, destroying the minbar of Saladin, which is a historically important pulpit. Rowan was in Israel on a tourist visa at the time, and when asked why he did it, he said he had attempted to burn down the mosque because he received divine instructions to do so. He further explained that he was told to do so to enable the Jews of Israel to rebuild a temple on Temple Mount in accordance to the book of Zechariah, which was meant to be a catalyst for the second coming of Christ. So Rohan believed that the mosque was in the way of the temple, which was actually biblically inaccurate anyways.
Yikes. So, yeah. I mean, it's one thing. It's one thing, dressing up like King David, learning how to play the lute and singing your heart out on the streets. It's another going into arson territory.
Yeah.
Especially of
there's
a
being an
culturally
arse,
significant
and then there's
building.
arson.
Whee!
But yeah, it's no joke. He went on to say that he was inspired by an article he had read in a June 1967 edition of The Plain Truth, which is this free monthly magazine published by the Worldwide Church of God, or the WCG. Now, the WCG could be like an episode in itself, but the founder, Herbert W. Armstrong, was an early pioneer of radio and television evangelism. So he was preaching Christianity through radio, TV, and magazines, which explains how he inadvertently managed to reach out and inspire an Australian transportation worker with untreated mental illness to burn down a mosque.
Yep, that does connect the dots together a little bit on that one, yeah.
Yeah, because like you think about that, I was like, oh, that's strange. Like this Australian guy, and he was very religious, and he went to Jerusalem to burn down a mosque. I wonder how that came about. It's kind of strange how these things happen, but I suppose with like TV and the internet and everything, like it's so easy to reach people, and for people who have these kind of delusions to like misinterpret things.
Yeah, I mean, even people who don't have delusions, it is completely possible to be influenced now from the other side of the world, whereas
exactly
generations beforehand it was kind of really your own country, and even then probably your local street.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of on a par with people who get like self-radicalized on the internet and stuff, like just going on a forum. If someone is that impressionable, it's kind of scary if you're not looking at both sides, like what you can bring yourself to sort of believe in. But anyways, Armstrong denied any link to Rohan and his act that angered the Muslim world so much that it was the main drive behind the forming of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is an organization that consists of 57 member states that work to, quote, safeguard and protect the interests of the Muslim world in the spirit of promoting international peace and harmony. So basically, they are pivotal in protecting these sacred places around the world that are important to their religion. So this event spurred this organization to be founded.
I suppose at least something good came out of it.
Yeah, unfortunately it had to be this. So ultimately Dennis Rowan was tried, found insane, and sent to get treatment at a psychiatric facility. And in 1974 he was sent back to Australia on humanitarian grounds, where he continued his treatment. So as with Paris syndrome, the symptoms of Jerusalem syndrome usually go away when the sufferer is removed from the city. However, it seems that many of them do not actually leave, like we saw. At least from what we saw watching that Louis Theroux clip and hearing afflicted tourists talk about it, like if they aren't violent or a danger to themselves in any way, they generally just end up staying there. Like, I don't know how, if they just overstay tourist visas, but they end up just camping out, LARPing forever.
Wow. It's kind of the opposite of the Paris syndrome, where it's like these people can't wait to get away. These people just want to stay.
Yeah, the delusion is so strong. Like, it's kind of a weird grey area. And if you think about the guy, like, LARPing as King David, he's probably, for everyone who visits that place, he's probably like, oh, did you see that guy? You know what I mean? Like, he's probably like
he's
an attraction.
Yeah, I was going to say he's almost a tourist attraction in himself.
Because they're always going to be there. You're always going to see them. And I wonder, for the people who don't know about Jerusalem syndrome, when they go on vacation there, I wonder what they think these people are doing.
Oh, do you think maybe people think it's a bit like when you go to Rome and there's like people in like Roman guard costume at the Colosseum?
Maybe. Like, I do wonder. Like, it's very strange. Like, what do the people who aren't aware of this think when they see these people camping out in the hills and like speaking in tongues as well? That's quite...
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd probably get relatively close to them and realise, okay, this is a bit different from somebody pretending to be like Aladdin at Disney World.
You're actually not allowed to wear convincing costumes of characters at Disney World. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Yeah, you're not allowed to wear them because I think like people could think you're actually working there.
That actually, that makes complete sense.
There's this thing where, like, adults who go to Disneyland and like it, because they
can't
make
dress
them wear
a sash of shame. So you can you can wear the costume, but you have to wear the sash that says "not really a character."
No, you're not even allowed to do that, I don't think so. Some people who want to go there and cosplay as their favourite character, they'll, for example, if your favourite character is Donald Duck, no, that's a bad one because you'd be going around naked from the waist down. But if your favourite character is like Minnie Mouse, maybe you'll show up in like black leggings, a polka dot dress and a red bow in your hair and maybe some ears. So that would be as close to the cosplay as you could get. So they start wearing these really subtle kind of cosplays of characters. But yeah, no Donald Ducking in Disneyland, please. He's actually, isn't he officially a member of the
Ku Klux Klan?
The Navy? No, the Navy, like the US Navy.
Is he?
I read something about that. Don't quote me on that. If you know, send us a comment. So, to wrap this up here, I have to point out that neither Paris syndrome nor Jerusalem syndrome are recognized as legitimate conditions in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, but there have been papers written about the condition, as we know. So, Chris, I hope you have enjoyed this episode exploring Paris syndrome and Jerusalem syndrome.
It's been really interesting. It's not something that I'd ever really thought of before. I had heard of Paris syndrome before. I think it might have come up on an episode of QI. Quite a few years ago.
Every time we talk about something strange, you're like, that was on QI.
But I think that one genuinely was. But I had never heard of Jerusalem syndrome, and I'm a big fan of Louis Theroux, and I'd never seen that clip before. That was from a very early Louis Theroux episode
Me
where
too.
he was dressed like David McGregor. See, this is my test to see if he actually listens to these episodes. Send me a message, Dave.
Yeah.
I thought really, really interesting. I'm surprised with the frequency that this occurs, especially for Jerusalem syndrome, that it occurs.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just shocked to find out that it was a rate of up to 2 people per week for something that sounds like a kind of kooky, marginalized, sort of unusual syndrome that you think, oh, probably 2 people get it a year. There's John and Jerry. That's it. No, there's like John and Jerry.
Damn it, Jerry.
Every week.
He's so suggestible.
But no, I think it fantastic episode, a wonderful file, something a little bit different. We haven't ventured into this territory before, so thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. And welcome back, Chris.
Thank you very much. Just before we kind of wrap up today, I'd just like to say to everybody, thank you so much. It was quite difficult being in hospital, being trapped in one room for 11 days. And every time I did get a spare 10 seconds and I did manage to look down on my phone when I saw lovely messages coming in, both about the podcast and directly to myself as well, it was really nice. It was not something that I would have expected in that scenario, but it was just really nice to get. So thank you everybody for all of the support. I really appreciate it. And I'm just really, really happy to say that we've got a lovely, happy, beautiful baby boy who's been sitting in the corner in this, not in the corner, that sounds awful. He's been
Yeah, what are you doing?
He's been in his Moses basket in the corner, just happily just kind of cooing away in there. So if you heard anything in the background, that might have been him. But yes, thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate it. And we have hit quite a few special milestones this week in terms of the number of listeners we've had. We've been getting more recommendations, more reviews, and just thank you so much, everybody. The podcast is growing exponentially, and we love you all.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you here. Thanks, especially for the reviews. We've got some funny ones and some really nice ones. And yeah, thanks to all the people who came over from Gen Y and the people who continue listening. It's friggin' awesome.
Like last time, if you can give us a review, rate us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, that would help. If you are listening to us, please make sure you follow us on Instagram at d.s.radio. We've got way more people that listen to us than actually follow us, so we'd like to bring those numbers up a little bit, just so that you can all make sure you see the images associated with this and know when a new episode's coming out if you're not subscribed on your podcast platform.
And you can even see what we look like. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, and congratulations again, Chris.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.